In the village of Torske, in the Donetsk region, Russian soldiers once again showed what the Russian world is. They cold-bloodedly shot a civilian who was simply riding a bicycle. Soldiers from the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces recorded this military crime using a drone. The occupiers first opened fire on the man and then approached and finished him off at point-blank range. But the enemy did not have time to rejoice in their impunity for long. Ukrainian defenders quickly identified the positions of the murderers. First, FPV drones attacked them and then artillery came in. As a result, all 3 Russians involved in the shooting of the unarmed man were eliminated. The Russian army continues to try to capture Torske, which remains an important tactical target for them. This village is part of the so-called Lyman salient, blocking the enemy's path to Seversk, Lyman and Sloviansk. Torske was liberated by Ukrainian forces back in October 2022 during a successful counter-offensive, and since then the Russians have been unable to regain control of it. Control of the village opens the way to the strategically important Lyman, which is a railroad and logistics hub. They have repeatedly reported that they had taken Torske several times. They showed a video with several soldiers with a Russian flag. It was their momentary happiness. After that, a commission arrived and discovered that Torske had not been taken, and accordingly, the heads of their command flew off. That's why the task was set at the end of June to take Torske by July the 1st. There were indeed attempts to do so, with a huge number of infantry moving to our positions, but we did not lose our positions and the invaders were destroyed, the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade noted. Russian propagandists have repeatedly stated that the village was allegedly captured, even publishing a video with several of their soldiers and a flag. However, in reality, it turned out that this was just a show. After checking, it became clear that Torske is still under the control of Ukraine, the brigade reported. To prove the opposite, the Russians began to throw infantry into battle en masse, but all their assaults ended in defeat. The Ukrainian armed forces repelled the attacks and destroyed a significant number of the attackers. Numerous cases of Russian troops murdering or abusing civilians have surfaced since the start of Moscow's full-scale invasion in 2022. Ukrainian prosecutors and monitoring groups have documented mounting instances of Russian forces executing Ukrainian prisoners of war in a systemic violation of the Geneva Convention.
Ukraine and Israel have agreed to strengthen their bilateral cooperation to address security threats and tighten economic cooperation, the foreign ministers of both countries said Wednesday during a meeting in Kyiv. Moscow, Tehran and Pyongyang are united into a single alliance of criminal regimes, which support one another and threaten the whole free world, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha told a joint news conference with his visiting Israeli counterpart Gideon Sa'ar. In response to this threat, we agreed to activate multilateral and bilateral cooperation, he added, further noting that, today we decided to start a separate dialogue about the Iranian threat. According to Associated Press, Sybiha added that Ukraine and Israel have significant potential in the field of defense technologies, stressing, it is time to implement it together for the sake of the security and stability of both countries. Sa'ar, for his part, expressed full support for Ukraine and said that the ministers had on Wednesday agreed to launch a strategic dialogue on Iran. Our actions against its weapons and technology contribute to European security and to the security of Ukraine, Sa'ar said.
Це його перший офіційний візит до України, і ми розглядаємо його як вияв готовності до розвитку наших двосторонніх відносин. Ми мали сьогодні предметні переговори з широкого спектру питань: безпека, гуманітарна та економічна співпраця, розвиток інновацій та спільні проекти. Україна та Ізраїль мають значний потенціал у сфері оборонних технологій. Настав час реалізовувати його спільно заради безпеки та стабільності обидвох держав. Багато століть обидві наші держави добре знають, що означає боротися за життя, свободу. Москва, Тегеран і Пхеньян об'єдналися в єдиний альянс злочинних режимів, які підтримують одне одного та загрожують всьому вільному світу. На тлі цих загроз домовилися активізувати багатосторонню і двосторонню співпрацю. І сьогодні ми вирішили започаткувати окремий діалог щодо іранської загрози. Люди живуть пліч-опліч багато століть, обидві наші держави добре знають, що означає боротися за життя, свободу та гідність і перемогу.
In our meeting, we discussed ways to further strengthen our relations and partnership. We discussed the security threats to Europe and the Middle East, to Ukraine and Israel, and ways to work together.
Шановні журналісти, радий вітати сьогодні.
We decided today to have a strategic dialogue between our ministries on the Iranian threat. Our actions against its weapons and technology contribute to European security and to the security of Ukraine. Iran must not be allowed to continue its nuclear ambitions. It must not be allowed to continue its support for terror. The international community must act firmly against Iran. I call on the E3 countries, Germany, France, and the UK, to activate the snapback now.
Tens of Palestinians in Gaza City queued up in long lines around a soup kitchen with their pots, hoping to fill them up with whatever little they could get from the watery tomato soup that has little eggplant pieces in it. According to Associated Press, only the very fortunate of them get eggplants, but for the vast majority, it is just soup. The queues were neat until the soup started to run out. People started scrambling with their pots to get some of the soup. Nadia Mduk, a displaced woman living in a makeshift tent together with her husband and 3 children, said the soup kitchen used to have some 20 to 30 people gathered around it when food used to be available and prices were relatively cheap, but now there are more than 300 gathering to get food from the same soup kitchen. When I stand at the charity kitchen, there's a lot of pushing and hitting. I'm exposed to danger at any moment, especially since I'm pregnant, and there's also the risk of sunstroke. But I bear it and say, it's for the sake of my children, she said. We rely on this meal until another charity kitchen distributes food, Mduk added. 28 countries including Britain, Japan and a host of European nations issued a joint statement Monday saying the war in Gaza must end now, the latest sign of allies sharpening language as Israel's isolation deepens. Gaza's population of more than 2 million Palestinians is in a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, now relying largely on the limited aid allowed into the territory. Israel's offensive has displaced some 90% of the population, with many forced to flee multiple times. Most of the food supplies Israel has allowed into Gaza go to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, an American group backed by Israel. Since its operations began in May, hundreds of Palestinians have been killed in shootings by Israeli soldiers while heading to the sites, according to witnesses and health officials. Israel's 21 months of war with Hamas have pushed Gaza to the brink of famine, sparked worldwide protests and led to an international criminal court arrest warrant against Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.